Hi, everyone. I hope you all had a lovely weekend. I know I enjoyed some time with my family. It's good to be back. Today, I'm particularly excited to introduce to you your first big assignment for English 0999, which is the drafting of a narrative essay, which you will workshop and later submit for English 1101. But the draft itself is going to be graded here in 0999. So before we even jump into the assignment itself, I want to briefly discuss what we've already talked about in class concerning the narrative mode. Remember, narration is just one of the many rhetorical modes that we will discuss in this course. And as an additional reminder, rhetorical modes are the various ways in which we communicate through language. So for this assignment, we are going to be focusing on narration, but later in the semester, for example, we'll be looking at persuasion. So, what is a narrative or narrative writing? Well, as we've talked about, narration is the art of storytelling. So, the purpose of narrative writing is to tell a story, and a narrative itself is really just a story. As I've said before, whenever you tell a story about an event or an experience to another person, you are practicing narration. So, for instance, when you recount your hiking experience this past weekend to your classmate, you are providing a narrative. Now, we have practiced this in class. I want you to think back to the writing assignment that we worked on in class when I asked you to tell of a time when you were in a new or unfamiliar situation. So this exercise was great practice for our upcoming narrative essay. So I just wanted to give you all a few reminders about the essential qualities of narrative writing. It can be fact or fiction, but it should be emotionally engaging for your audience. And narrative writing should have a plot that unfolds with a conflict and characters and a theme. And I'll talk a little bit more about those features when we jump into the assignment. I do want to give a quick note on theme because I know it can sometimes cause confusion. As we talked about in class, the theme of a narrative is the ultimate message that your story seeks to express. And I want to remind you of this lovely resource that we picked through in class that provides some examples of themes and where you can find those themes in literature. So, let's go ahead and talk about your assignment. You can find it in your assignments folder in D2L, and I'll also pull up a copy here to walk you through it. So, as always, I try to tie all assignments and activities in this class back to our specific English 0999 learning outcomes and show you how your work in this class will prepare you for life beyond the classroom. So, a narrative essay assignment is designed to sharpen your storytelling capacity. Proficiency in storytelling will serve you well in your academic career, but also in your future careers and your personal lives. For instance, the ability to narrate a compelling and emotionally engaging story might help you land a promotion. Or perhaps it might help you gain support for a new policy at your child's school. Drafting a narrative essay, which is really what we're doing on this particular assignment, drafting a narrative essay will not only help you reach those broader goals, but it's going to give you some real practice in mastering the steps of the writing process and revising and clarifying your writing. Practice in drafting an essay will be useful as you plan and manage essays and projects in your other college courses. And also, you can see below the list of very specific learning outcomes met by this assignment, and also the learning outcomes that will be met by the writing of the ultimate final draft that you'll submit for 1101. So, what do you have to do? You will draft a 1,000-word narrative essay. So why so long? Well, I've said this in class. Your draft always needs to be at least as long as your final essay. And yes, the final essay requires a minimum of 1,000 words, so your draft should also be at least 1,000 words, preferably more. So this assignment is really an extension of our class discussion relating to Gary Steingart's 69 Cents. You read this, we talked about it in class. You are going to write about a time when you or someone you know felt on the margins. You should be very familiar with the meaning of being on the margins based on our class discussions, but as a reminder, you can review the quote that we discussed extensively in class. And here it is. I've got it copied again for you right there. You are welcome in this assignment to tell a personal narrative or to tell the story of someone you know, such as a close relative. If you're telling someone else's story, you should have some involvement in the story in some way. I would like for you to have some involvement. Either way, your story should be compelling and it should be emotionally engaging. So remember, the purpose of your essay is to move your audience through storytelling. Your story does not have to evoke pity. You can draw on any human emotion, just as long as your writing is emotionally engaging. So your audience for this draft is a general college level reader. If it helps, you can just imagine that your classmates are your audience. Your essay should be organized chronologically with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Also, as we talked about in class, your writing should utilize strong transition words. And you can see a list of some really great transition words from our textbook in chapter 10 right here. Okay, so please, as you write, use the first person point of view, even if you're mostly telling someone else's story. As I have stated before, if you're telling someone else's story, you should have some involvement in the story in some way. The best way to ensure this is to write about someone you know personally. Please avoid the second person point of view and the pronoun you. Okay. You should use the narrative past tense in terms of tense. So for example, I decided that school was not the place for me. The weight of this assignment forms 20% of your overall grade for this class. So yes, this is a big assignment. And as always, the academic honesty, plagiarism, AI use policies outlined in the syllabus apply to this assignment. So as you get started, please note my additional tips for success. Pay attention here to my suggested formula for maintaining focus in your writing. So you can always go back to this statement. The purpose of my essay is to blank in order to blank. So, for example, the purpose of my essay is to narrate a story in order to show that even a native-born person can find themselves on the margins of society. Okay, so you don't even necessarily have to have this statement before you get started writing. It might kind of form as you get some ideas on the paper, but this is a good way to kind of make sure that you, like I said, maintain that focus. Now, you should write so that your story unfolds in sequence. Remember, beginning, middle, and end. Your story should be driven by a conflict, like we talked about in class, whether it's tangible outward conflict or more of an internal struggle. The use of details and a really strong introduction to grip your audience. Those things are also encouraged. And as always, you should aim to use correct spelling, punctuation, and grammar, though really that criteria will be assessed in the final draft, not this draft. So for this actual draft, the following criteria must be met. Your essay has to be 1,000 words minimum if you want to receive full credit. You may write more than 1,000 words. You are encouraged to, but you have to have at least 1,000. Your draft must be narrative in nature. And if you are struggling, please let me know, and we'll meet and we'll talk about what narration is. We're gonna do a lot of workshopping this in class. We'll do a lot of in-class writing. But just to go ahead and get ahead of any problems, go ahead and reach out if you're struggling with the concept of narrative. Please follow MLA formatting when you submit your draft. And if you are unfamiliar with how to format an MLA paper, you can click this link here. And also, your draft ultimately, when you submit it to me, does need to be in one of the formats here below before you turn it in to the Dropbox in D2L, which is what you will do. Really, I plan on looking at these extensively before you turn them in, so I highly doubt that you would somehow accidentally turn in the wrong format. And just know that I do plan on doing a lot of workshopping with you, and you should plan on doing a lot of writing in lab in class. All right, the draft is going to be due in D2L on September 12th, and I encourage you to go ahead and get started right away.